Hiya guys, West Country Explorer here. I've come to Salisbury today. I'm at the Cathedral and I'm gonna go on the tower tour in a few minutes. Don't think I've ever done it before, so first time doing the tour up the tower. And I'll do as much recording as I can and hopefully at the very least be able to do a bit of recording up somewhere near the top and show you guys what it's like up the tower. So, fancy coming along? Of course you do, guys. Let's join me for a tour.
Stone work there, which is supporting the inner wall of the cathedral. The cathedral was built, well, they started building it in 1220, it took them an amazingly short time, 38 years, to complete it. But at that stage, they didn't. The tower and the spire were added about 100 years later. So it's just the main body of the cathedral was completed in 38 years, which coincidentally is the same length of time that it took to complete the recent restoration project that ended earlier this year. And most of the cathedral is built of this pale-coloured Chilmark limestone, and which comes from the village of Chilmark, which is about 12 miles west of Salisbury, and the stone is still quarried there to this day. There's about 60,000 tonnes of it in this building, and they reckon it probably would have taken about 7 to 10 cart loads per day for 38 years, and those carts would have been pulled by oxen, of course, in those days, to get the stone here from Chilmark to build the cathedral. So a great achievement in itself. You can still see some of these holes up here. Those are called putlog holes, and that's where the original sort of medieval scaffolding would have been keyed into the wall when they were building the cathedral. There's actually, and there's one down here blocked up by wood, and there's one behind this fox's head here, which you're probably wondering why there is a fox's head there. Very simple story really. So that was carved by one of the stonemasons who worked on the restoration project, a guy called Richard Dean. He left in about 1997, and they just found this fox's head lying around in the mason's yard. So they thought it'd be quite nice to put it up somewhere. So they decided to block up one of the putlog holes with that fox's head. I think he's still around, but doesn't work here anymore. You can see that, they started building at the east end of the cathedral, because that's where the altar is, and that enabled them to have sort of services, from quite early on. They didn't have to wait for the whole building to be completed. And they gradually worked westwards in this direction. And as they got down to this end, they cut a few corners. You can see the sort of darker stone. I don't think it's stone. And down here, this is probably just pebbles from the river, really. That they used for that bit of wall down there. They decided to cut a few corners. They were probably up against a deadline. They knew the king was coming for the consecration, and so they just did whatever was necessary to get the building finished. There's lots of wood around here, which, as you can see, this is all oak, and I'll talk more about that when we get up into the roof space higher up. But if you turn inwards, you'll see there's a sort of darker colour stone. These pillars in front of you. That's another form of limestone. It's called we call it Purbeck marble. It's not really marble. It's just another form of limestone which comes from the Isle of Purbeck on the Jurassic south coast of England. About 146 million years ago, it was formed down there, and but it's much stronger and it has better weight-bearing qualities than the Chilmark stone, and it can be polished up to look like marble. which is why we call it perfect marble, but it's not really marble. And there's more of it down the east end because that's, as I say, that's where they started building. And I think as they got up to this end, funds became a bit tighter, and it's more expensive than the Chilmark stone. And so there's less of it down here. But it provides a very good contrast to the lighter coloured Chilmark stone. Okay, so all the way down the length of the cathedral. Now, this is a unique view in any English cathedral, to be able to see all the way from one end to the other without interruption. In all the other cathedrals in this country, there's a screen sort of halfway down, dividing the nave, which is where all the people sat, from the choir. There was a stone screen here in Salisbury until the late 1700s, when a major restoration project was conducted by a man called James Wyatt, at the instruction of the Dean and Chapter at the time, and he took down the stone screen. It was replaced by a sort of see-through metal one, but then that was dismantled in the 1960s. So we now have this wonderful uninterrupted view all the way down to the far end. One of the other things that James Wyatt did, and he was regarded as being a bit of a cultural vandal for doing this, was he removed all the medieval stained glass and replaced it with this plain plate glass, which was very much the fashion of the time at the end of the 1700s. Of course, it made the cathedral much lighter. He also painted over, the Chilmark stone would have been painted probably red, and he whitewashed all of that, and so it had the effect of making the building much lighter, which was very much the fashion of the time. Ironically, at the time he took out all the medieval stained glass, the top window at the far end, which is called the Moses window, was given to the cathedral by the first Lord Radnor, who was a local nobleman, and just as all the medieval stained glass was coming out. And down below, the blue stained glass window, a very modern one, that's called the Prisoners of Conscience window. That was installed in 1979, made by a Frenchman called Gabriel Loire. He was like the sort of Mr. Stained Glass of the 20th century, and I think it's a very fine piece. So well worth looking at more closely. It's at the end of the Trinity Chapel at the far end. So just looking down, you see the stone ledge above the arches on each side. Can you see that just before you get to the middle of the cathedral, it sort of dips down about 8 inches actually. And also, if you look at the perfect marble pillars, just by the halfway mark, as it were, they appear to be sort of leaning outwards slightly. And it's not an optical illusion, they are actually leaning outwards slightly. And that was because, as I mentioned earlier, the tower and the spire were added 100 years later. And those pillars weren't designed to take the weight of an extra 6,500 tons of Chilmark stone, which was added on top. So they just sort of bowed slightly, and the ledge dipped slightly with all that extra weight. But they've long since settled in their current positions, and I don't think they're going to fall over anytime soon, we hope. So I said that all the medieval stained glass was taken out. Well, that's true, but actually back in the 19th century, so the 1800s, some of the medieval stained glass that was in the chapter house, which is where the Magna Carta is now kept, and I hope you'll go and see that afterwards if you haven't seen it already. They moved some of the medieval stained glass from there, and they put it up here behind you. So we do actually have some medieval stained glass here. In the middle, you've got three coats of arms there. The right-hand one, the three lions on a red shield. That's coat of arms of King Henry III, who was the King of England at the time that the cathedral was built. In the middle, you've got the fleur-de-lis, the coat of arms of King Louis IX of France, who was so holy that he became Saint Louis, after whom the US city is named. And then on the left, you've got the coat of arms, the red and yellow stripes of the coat of arms of Provence, because Henry and Louis married a pair of sisters, Eleanor and Margaret, who both came from Provence, and so that's why we have the coat of arms of Provence there. So there's about 4,800 tons of oak in this building, and a lot of it, in fact more than half of it, came from Southern Ireland. King Henry III had extensive estates in Southern Ireland, and he very generously arranged for it to be shipped over to form the roof of this great building. So the roof was originally constructed as a medieval scissor beam structure with triangular, with sort of struts going out that way. For some reason, in Tudor times, so in the mid-1500s, the roof was dismantled and then put up again, but with these double queen posts that you see. They used pretty much the same wood to do that, but they didn't need such long pieces of wood to create this new structure. And it's been like this ever since. And I mean, I love these curved beams that on each side. So they would have been, especially chosen in the forest to form that supporting role on each side. Looking at the two sides, you can see that on that side, the sort of battens, they go diagonally with a bit of a gap in between each one. But then if you look at this side, they're horizontal and no gaps. So the reason for that is that that side is south facing, so that's the side that gets the sun. So we've got 450 tons of lead on the roof, covering about 2¼ acres. And when the sun does shine occasionally, that lead can heat up, and so having the gap there sort of allows for expansion and contraction, depending on the temperature. Whereas this side, of course, is north facing, it doesn't get any direct sunlight at all. You can still see, a lot of it's just wooden pegs, because back in the day they didn't have nuts and bolts, of course. Halfway along on that side you can see it better, but also on this side there's a long diagonal beam going up. So they think that was probably a ship's mast, which was sawed in two and then sort of put up here on the recommendation of Sir Christopher Wren, the architect of St Paul's Cathedral in London, of course, and he did a survey of the cathedral in the late 1600s and made various recommendations. One of which we think was to just add a bit of extra support to the roof structure by adding that sort of diagonal support. And then looking down, we've got the vaulting, the ceiling, which you saw from down below. This pale-coloured material, it looks very like the Chilmark stone, but it's actually a much lighter material called tufa, spelled T-U-F-F-A, and it comes from the Mendip Hills, about 50 miles west of here, sort of Cheddar Gorge and around there. So what they would have done is they would have erected a sort of wooden frame underneath and covered it with this tufa, and then on top of that they poured this liquid substance. It was basically burnt limestone on which they poured water. It caused this chemical reaction, came to the boil, and they poured it onto the tufa. And when it cooled down, it bound it all together to create this very strong, but actually quite light in terms of weight, ceiling for the cathedral. And then you've got these deep wells on each side, so they're about 16 feet deep. I think you were saying you've been to York Minster, was it, a couple of years ago? And following the fire that they had there in, I think it was the 1980s, where the weight of the water that the firefighters had to use to put out the fire, it caused part of the ceiling to collapse. So after that, they decided to put drainage holes in the bottom of these wells here, just to so God forbid if we ever did have a fire here, the water could drain straight through and hopefully not bring the ceiling down. But it's yeah, I love the smell of the water. Yeah. And it's a high altar here, and so if you look, you see the wooden balcony up here, and just below there's a stone ledge. So that was as high as the cathedral went when they first built it. So everything above that ledge was added about 100 years afterwards, in the 1300s. Okay, and that was when this white metalwork was installed. This is Christopher Wren described it as the finest medieval ironwork he ever saw. One of his recommendations actually was to, these were all windows here, and he recommended that they all be filled in, and it took him about 100 years after he made that recommendation to actually do it. But yeah, so just to strengthen the structure, because originally it would have been a sort of lantern, and this would have been there would have been no floor here, so you would have had the windows with the light flooding in and flooding down onto the altar below. And then these huge iron crossbeams, which are rather ugly, they were added in the Victorian time, so in the 1800s, when Sir George Gilbert Scott did another restoration, and so they're sort of strapped to the outside of the building and pulling it all together basically, and we've got these fish plates here, which again sort of allow for expansion and contraction depending on sort of temperature. These were windows, so they've all been filled in. Yes, absolutely. You would have just had the pillars there and then light flooding in, but they were all blocked up. The James Wyatt restoration at the end of the 1700s. If you look at the windows, you'll see that in full diamond shape bits of glass, and they've got sort of names and things scratched on them. So the story behind that is back in 1984-85, they did a survey of the Spire and discovered that the stonework was very, very thin in places, particularly around the decorative bands, and 3 decorative bands on the Spire. And the stone, it was down to sort of half its proper width, and through the ravages of time and weather. And so a big international appeal, the Spire appeal, was launched with then Prince of Wales, now King Charles, as its patron, to restore the fabric of the Spire, and it turned into restoration of the whole cathedral. And over the last 40 years, it's raised about £35 million. And, but one of the early ideas they had was to sell off these little bits of glass to the public for about £5 each, and people could inscribe the names of loved ones, or there's some quite good engravings actually. There's even one of the Spire itself somewhere. So that was actually it. That was an early fundraiser for the Spire appeal. seconds after. Yeah. Local Wiltshire regiment back in the late 1800s, in memory of fallen comrades, comrades who died in India and Aden, I think. So they're the ones that do the Westminster chimes every quarter. And you can see that, although there are only 4 bells, there are 5 wires, and the right-hand bell, which strikes the bottom note, has 2 hammers on it. That's because when it plays that tune, the da 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 da, when it does that bottom note, the hammer can't get back fast enough to do it twice in quick succession. So, which is why you have 2 hammers on that right-hand bell. And then the big bell down below. So that was originally housed in a separate bell tower. When we go up to the next level, you'll be able to go out onto the balcony. You can see where that bell tower was, just to the northwest of the cathedral, and it's got quite an interesting inscription on it, because it says it was made in 1661, but then it also says that that was the 13th year of the reign of King Charles II. Now, when I went to school, I was taught that King Charles II's reign began in 1660. So in which case it would have only been the 2nd year of his reign, rather than the 13th year. But whoever made that bell, he basically rewritten English history and completely expunged the whole Cromwellian era, when we didn't have a king or a queen, of course, 11 years, and so that bell was, yes, it's housed in a separate bell tower, which got actually quite badly trashed in the English Civil War, which of course ended with the beheading of Charles I, and so the guy who did the inscription backdated the start of Charles II's reign to the date on which his dead father had his head chopped off. By the sort of late 1700s, that bell tower was in a state of considerable disrepair and was in danger of falling down. So at the time of the James Wyatt restoration, it was dismantled, and this bell was put up here instead. Just to put in the TV screen and see what. So we're not allowed to go out onto the south balcony because that's where the peregrine falcons live. When we had them nesting there in the spring, but I think they may have turned the CCTV. But we have some cameras spying on them when they're residents. But I think they've long since left the nest. Anyway, let me shed a bit of light on the situation here.
Look at that.
So here we are. We've done, congratulations, everyone. You've done your 332 steps to get here, 224 feet. But there's another 180 feet above us. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you climb those ladders. but Gary Price, the clerk of works, he does have to climb those ladders to get to the top to change the light bulb once a year on top of the spire. So all this wooden scaffolding that you see, it was originally thought that it was left from when they built the spire in the 1300s, but they did a dendrochronological survey of it about 25 years ago, and discovered that it was, the wood was younger than that, we now think it was erected. There was quite a big storm at the end of the 1300s, which did a bit of damage to the newly erected spire at that time, and so they had to put the scaffolding up to repair that damage, and they decided to leave it, and it's been here ever since.
Is there room to slide down?
Able to slide down?
Mum,
Yes, one sec.
Mum.
So here we are, looking west, famous water meadows, in which the likes of Constable and Turner painted their iconic portraits of the cathedral. And as you can see, they're living up to their name. Looking north across the city, and on the hill in the distance, that is Old Sarum, which is where the original city was, and where there was a cathedral there for almost 200 years. They started building it in about 1080, I think. And there was also a Norman castle up there. But by the end of this, or beginning of the 1200s, the military and the clergy were not getting on very well with each other. The garrison there kept on locking the clergy out of their cathedral, and so there was quite a lot of friction. Basically there wasn't enough space for people up there. There was no natural water supply, so they had to carry all the water up to the top of the hill. And it was quite windy up there as well, so the clergy couldn't hear themselves singing. So there's a legend that the bishop at the time got an archer to fire an arrow in this direction, and that this is where it landed, and he decided that this is where he was going to build his new cathedral. I mean, it's about 2 miles from here to Old Sarum, 3 kilometres, quite a long way to fire an arrow. So the legend got embellished, and apparently the arrow hit a deer, which then staggered on and collapsed in a heap here, and that was why they decided to build a cathedral here. Even more fanciful, I think. It's far more likely is that the bishop at the time owned this piece of boggy ground, and he decided, for better or worse, that this was where he was going to build his new cathedral. So he hired a man called Elias of Derham in Norfolk, who had designed Ely Cathedral, which is built on equally boggy ground in the Fens, to come and construct his new cathedral here. Where the bishops of Salisbury used to live up until the early 20th century, and then the bishop at the time decided it was too big, too cold, too drafty, so he moved from there, and it's now the Cathedral Choir School. Salisbury Cathedral Choir is the first choir in England to have female choristers, as recently as 1996, I think. So if you can stick around until 5 o'clock this evening, you'll probably hear them singing beautifully at evensong. Straight ahead of us is Bishop Wordsworth Grammar School, very fine state school. One of the teachers there in the last century taught English was William Golding, the author of Lord of the Flies.
So there you go, guys, a tour of Salisbury Cathedral Tower. Man, thoroughly enjoyable. I absolutely loved every bit of it. I mean, some spectacular views from up the top there. I paid on the day. It was £22.50 I paid for it. I think it was £22, £22.50. I think you might be able to get it a bit cheaper if you pay in advance, like book in advance and that. So I mean, a little bit on the pricey side, but I mean, I was happy to pay it myself. I mean, some people might say it's a lot of money, but I mean, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. If you can afford it and you're happy to pay the price, I'd recommend it. Definitely go for it. Yeah, you've got to be a bit fit to do all that and not suffer from vertigo and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, guys, very good, very enjoyable. I hope you've enjoyed watching. Look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime guys, as usual, stay safe, take care, God bless.